Well, I want to welcome each of you to today's Zoom event, Theology Today, winners of the Goodwin Prizes for Excellence in Theological Writing. It's great to be here today with all of you. This is an event sponsored by Theological Horizons, which is a nonprofit ministry centered here in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the University of Virginia. Our mission is to support Christians and seekers in academia by providing a welcoming community for engaging faith, thought, and life. And from the very beginning of this ministry, the focus on scholarship and on theology has been at the center. And for us, the Goodwin Prize is such a great example of encouraging excellence in Christian scholarship and the intellectual work of discipleship. So a little bit about Theological Horizons. We're centered at the Bonhoeffer House here in Charlottesville. Our motto is all are welcome always. So if you are a student or a professor or a scholar or a lay person, a clergy person, whether you live in Charlottesville or across the world, we're always wanting to welcome you into whatever we do, whether it's here in person or virtually. So invite you to make the most of our resources at theologicalhorizons.org and to check out the Writing Prize program, this Goodwin Writing Prize that we are excited to be featuring today. So the Louise and Richard Goodwin Prize for Excellence in Theological Writing was founded in 2001 to recognize upcoming scholars in the theological field. And it's amazing to see your faces, so many of you today. We also have the honor today of being joined by Carrie and Frank Lauthan, our good friends from Atlanta, who are the sponsors of the competition, who after a very memorable evening in Atlanta many years ago, really responded to this vision, the need for support for young scholars in theology, and to support these young, talented thinkers who are out in the field working so hard, often so unrecognized. And so they saw that need and they responded with sponsorship and generosity, and have kept this Goodwin Writing Prize going for 20 years now. So Frank and Carrie, on behalf of all of these theology students and grads who have received your generosity in concrete ways, we just want to recognize you and thank you for your central role in providing this for everyone. So we're really glad you're here. The Goodwin Prize Awards are given to essays that demonstrate creative theological thinking, engagement with the Christian tradition, and commitment to the well-being of the church. We are offering it again this year. The submission deadline is on June 1st. So if you're interested in submitting or sharing this, you can always go to theologicalhorizons.org/Goodwin Prize. So that's your welcome. And now we can get into our conversation. We have the delight of introducing you all to three winners of the 2020 Goodwin Prize competition, Rachael Griggs, Jimmy Myers, and Abraham Wu, who you will be meeting. At around 1 o'clock, we'll be joined by Tim Hartman, who won a Goodwin Prize back in 2011. And at this moment, he is teaching in his role as the Associate Professor of Theology at Columbia Theological Seminary. So for those of you who are worried about getting jobs, there's one example of someone who actually got one. So ever hopeful and proud of him. So Rachael, Jimmy, and Abraham, I want to welcome you in particular and all of you to this conversation. So I'd like you to just introduce yourselves by telling us your name, your institution, a program of your study, and then a little snapshot story of a moment in your childhood that foreshadowed your academic or your theological future. So I'm going to start with Rachael, and then we'll go to Jimmy and Abraham.
Oh, hi, I'm Rachael. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I am so honored. And for starters, I'm here in Dayton, Ohio. I attend the University of Dayton, which is a Catholic Marianist institution. And I'm completing my master's in theology. I have one semester left, and that's the summer. So I should graduate in August. And I believe, I know that winning the Goodwin Prize, it really bolstered my PhD application. So I am staying here for the doctorate. And so I'm grateful for many reasons for this prize. And I'm also just super excited to talk about something that I've written to someone other than my cat. So it's very exciting. um, I've to foreshadow, when I was young, I spent my summers with my grandmother. She was a head cook at a Jesuit retreat house here in Ohio. I would go to work with her, and this is when I was young enough to where it was not work, it was helping. And you get a little older and you start wanting to be paid for it. But I was still young enough to want to serve coffee and bus tables and run the big dishwasher. And I met a lot of priests and brothers and sisters. And just having those summers as a child, they were very peaceful. And I'm very grateful for them. And I knew from a young age I would do something with the church, for the church. And I've always loved reading and writing, which is, of course, a characteristic, I think, of us all here. And so here I am.
Thank you so much. Abraham, let's meet you. Jimmy is next. Sorry, Jimmy, let's meet you.
Yeah, I also want to say with Rachel, thanks so much, Karen, for this opportunity, and to Frank and Carrie Louthan, thank you for supporting the wonderful prize competition. My name is Jimmy Myers. I am currently a doctoral student in the New Testament in the THD program at Duke Divinity School. My wife and 2 kids live here in Durham, North Carolina. And the THD, as some of you might know, is it's very similar to a PhD. The main differences or things that set it apart is its institutional affiliation and its ecclesial focus. So it's within the Divinity School at Duke and not in the graduate program of religion. And there's a focus within the program to connect what you're studying with your life and your participation and practice in the church. And so it's a really good fit for me. When I was young, I was first introduced to the Lord and scripture and song and dance in a missionary situation. My parents were working with Wycliffe Bible translators in Yaoundé, Cameroon. And every night we would gather together after dinner in our living room, and my dad would read scripture and my mom would lead us in song, and we would pray together. But it was just such a joyful time. And my dad would make jokes as he was reading the Bible and as we were sharing what was going on in our life and talking about God. And so meeting the Lord in that environment was an incredibly joyful activity, and that I think has carried me through to where I am now. It's an immensely joyful thing for me to get to study and read and think and pray within a community that is interested in loving and knowing God deeply and loving others and knowing them deeply. So that I think was a formative moment for me in preparing me for where I am now.
Thank you. Abraham, hello.
Hi, it's a privilege to be here. Like Rachel and Jimmy, I again want to thank Karen and Frank and Carrie Louthan for all of Theological Horizons for the opportunity to be here and to have been awarded a Goodwin Prize. It's a tremendous honor. It's certainly made a difference in my life. My name's Abraham Wu. You can call me Abe. I live here in Vancouver, British Columbia, so not Washington State, but in Canada. Married to Fiona. She's an elementary school teacher in Vancouver. I am finishing up my Master's of Divinity at Regent College in Vancouver. So Regent, if you don't know, is a small trans-denominational evangelical graduate school of theology. that I think is really unique, that it welcomes folks from a variety of different vocational backgrounds for a variety of vocational backgrounds. So not everyone that comes to Regent necessarily is trained into the ministry, but equipping lay people and seeing kind of flourishing in all of life. So that's my little shout out to Regent College. So my academic snapshot. I mean, yeah, Rachael and Jimmy just shared great stories. So now I feel bad about sharing mine. I didn't really have any inclination necessarily of what my scholarly gifts would be, except for the fact that I hope this is an inside baseball, but I was a part of something called AWANA. So it's Approved Workers Are Unashamed. It's a wonderful ministry for children. But I was a part of that, and I was brought to church through that. So that's how one of my neighbors brought my parents and brought me to church. I was a part of AWANA, and there I discovered that if I just memorized enough words, I could get things like candy. And I thought, this is an amazing thing. Now that's probably how the incentive structure started, but it worked out that as I did remember things, I really did learn to treasure this book that I was being introduced to the gospel, to scripture, and developing a love for it, not just a love because it gave me candy, but a love for it in a lifelong encounter with the living God. So yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Well, there's one thing that's even more difficult than writing an excellent scholarly, innovative, creative theological academic essay, and that's explaining it in simple terms to a lay audience. But we are going to ask you to make the attempt. So I would love to hear from each of you in about 3 minutes to tell us about your award-winning paper. And then a follow-up question, which would be, is there anything in your own intellectual or experience or even personal story that drew you to your topic? So we're going to start with Jimmy and then hear from Abraham and Rachael. Jimmy, your paper is called Give Gifts to the Evildoer, a rereading on Matthew 5:38-42.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's okay, actually, I'll lead into what the paper's about through the second question, because that sets up the frame for the paper. So I was working as the director of young adults in Houston, Texas, before coming to Duke. And one summer we were working through Bonhoeffer's book, Discipleship, in tandem with Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. And so I was tasked with teaching this little unit, Matthew 5:38-42. And so I read Bonhoeffer in relation to reading with the scripture. And then as I was reading Bonhoeffer, I just thought, this is wonderful. And I love you, Bonhoeffer, so much. But I couldn't help but think that there was some kind of missed emphasis in the way Bonhoeffer read it, in that he saw in Matthew 5:38-42 a command toward nonviolence. And when I reread Matthew 5:38-42, I thought, it seems like Jesus is actually commanding something positive, a positive practice that is not just the negative thing called nonviolence or non-retaliation. So that led me to then read Walter Wink, who has a wonderful on Matthew 5 called Neither. Well, I forget actually, but it's good. And it was found in his book called Engaging the Powers. And I read that and I had a similar experience to reading Bonhoeffer. I thought, man, this is really excellent writing, but I couldn't help but think that there was something off about it. And so that generated an investigation. And the paper really came out of that time. The argument of the paper, very simply, is that Jesus does not teach nonviolence simply in Matthew 5:38-42, nor does he teach, as Walter Wink argued, for his followers to engage in aggressive, nonviolent action. I couldn't help but notice that in the passage, when Jesus actually explicates or explains the negative command, "Don't stand against the evildoer," he goes on to give 4 different positive commands, 4 different positive practices, each of which is united by what I was arguing is one single action, giving gifts to the evildoer. So when someone slaps you on the right cheek, you don't just receive it and not act in return, nor do you respond aggressively, but actually you give the gift of a second cheek. And similarly, when someone takes your cloak, you don't just let them do it, and you don't demand a cloak in return or act in some other subtle, aggressive way, but you actually give them your undergarment. And the same with the command to go a second mile. You give a gift of going a second mile. And finally, you just give when someone asks something from you. So it was an immensely rewarding process to think with Bonhoeffer and with Walter Wink, and also against them as I was engaging with the passage. But it was also interesting to, after reading the passage in Matthew really closely, to go back to the lex talionis, the law of retaliation as it appears in the Old Testament, in the scriptures of Israel. And it was so curious and fascinating to discover that the language of giving actually appears in the command, original command to return evil for evil. So you have a kind of gift logic at work in the original command in the Old Testament that is reconfigured by Jesus in Matthew 5:38-42. I mean, the last thing that was really interesting to discover in writing this paper is that the first 3 positive commands, turning the other cheek when it's slapped, giving an undergarment when it's one is demanded, and then going a second mile when you're compelled to go one, is that key words from those commands appear in the passion narrative at the end of Matthew's gospel, in a way that seems to connect the two scenes together, two passages together, so that Jesus is not just teaching a gift giving in response to evil doing, but he actually embodies it at the end of his life as he heads to the cross. I hope that is, I hope that kind of summarizes it well. It was an immensely rewarding, process for me. So
yeah. Thank you so much. So exciting. It was exciting to read it. Well, Abraham, your paper is called "In Loving Memory: Applying a Theological Anthropology of Trinitarian Personhood to the Problem of Memory Loss." Can you tell us about your paper and whatever personal or intellectual experience is kind of behind it?
Yeah, I'd be so happy to. Karen, hearing you read out my paper makes me realize what a mouthful that is. So maybe I can do some work in simplifying that. Well, like Jimmy, I think I'm going to start with kind of the personal origins of it. My paper is on memory loss, and it deals with things like dementia, Alzheimer's, other kind of physiological diseases, or that things that would cause mental incapacity in some sense. So that's in some ways born out of pastoral experience. So during my time at Regent, I've just had the honor of working as a pastor at a local church, and that's been something that I've increasingly been walking congregants through. And it's also been something that my family and my wife's family has walked through. So both of my grandparents have Alzheimer's, and both of Fiona's grandparents, actually, they passed away last year, a year apart, but they both had dementia. And that was, for my family, we're just starting that. For Fiona's family, that was quite a long ordeal of watching their memories slip, and of course, I'm sure you'll be aware that that's oftentimes with something like dementia or Alzheimer's, personalities change. Someone who is incredibly maybe quiet or demure, and would never think about hurting or cussing, can suddenly change instantly, becoming the most aggressive, violent person you've ever met. It's such a jarring experience. And so there's a way in which that causes an incredible amount of grief, to see someone that you love change, and to see that they are no longer able to maybe share the same stories as you can, to no longer be able to tell their own stories with their own tongues as well, to seemingly lose capacities that make them seem human. Sometimes there can be the subscript, especially when I've been talking to people that have been walking through their parents or their grandparents with dementia, can admit sometimes just with the quietest whisper, it just feels like they're a shell of themselves. It doesn't even feel like they're there anymore. And that's understandable. My paper is in some ways trying to make sense and reckon with that grief, and also hopefully, I think, see how theology in light of the triune God tries to speak a better word. Because we think about human personhood in the sense of faculty. We think about it in the sense of ability. We think, if I can remember I am who I remember. I am in some ways a combination of memory, in some ways a combination of maybe my intellect, my desire. And if I lose one of those things, my mind is gone. I stop being a person. I think in some ways that's the unfortunate maybe byproduct of Descartes, of Descartes, that when we can no longer think, when we can no longer remember, I mean, who are we? I think my paper, very simply, it goes through a long route of looking through what does mind look like in the thought of Augustine, who is trying to in some way express the mystery of the triune God, and then finding traces of the triune God, looking within the mystery that is ourselves. And in some ways, I look to then Aquinas to also try to explain, what does the triune God look like? What does the Trinitarian God in whose image we were made look like? Now, we can't squash God into ourselves, and that's not how that works. But if we do believe that we're made in the image of God, well, are the divine persons mostly defined by their powers, by their abilities, by what they do? No, they're primarily defined by relations. We are the children of the Father because the Father is Jesus' Father. And when we're joined to Jesus, the Father is ours too. And without a Father, there can be no Son. Without a Son, there can be no Father. Aquinas called those subsistent relations, of course, that those are relationships that both make the persons who they are, that define the relationships, and also differentiate themselves. They constitute them and they differentiate them. Analogously, I wonder if we can think about our own relationships, our own personhood in that kind of subsistent way. I think about Fiona's grandmother, Doris. She recently passed away. But I think about the ways in which, even though she couldn't remember, the relations that defined her still continue to exist. She's still a grandmother of these people, a mother of these people, a wife to this person, a daughter of these people. That still exists regardless of whether or not she remembers them or not. And those relationships then can still have, I think, an effect in actually determining who a person is, not just what we do, but who we're related to. And ultimately, of course, we are remembered by the God that Isaiah writes, the God who does not forget. Even if a mother could forget, I, the Lord, cannot forget you. God remembers us. And in scripture, we see that actually God's remembrance of Israel is so much more than just a palliative sentiment. It's something that deals with their ultimate destiny, with their redemption, with their salvation. That Yahweh remembers Israel is so significant. And of course, that Jesus remembers the thief on the cross as we're still in our Easter season. Jesus remembering that thief on the cross in Luke 23 has enormous significance, of soteriologically. And so I think in changing our conception of personhood from merely people who have faculties, people with memory, people with intellect, people with will, to thinking about how can we be more relational persons, people who are related to others, and ultimately people who are remembered by others even when they don't have the ability to remember, and ultimately people who are upheld in the remembrance, in the loving memory of the living God who cannot forget.
Thank you, Abe. And I have to say, this paper for me was particularly rewarding because Nellie and Carolyn, who are on this call with me, serve people with memory loss every day. And to give them this tool, which is, an academic paper with a wonderfully long title, and yet it has such deeply personal resonances and such a thoughtful, I think, offering for them. So thank you I love to see these connections between people and all your beautiful work. Well, Rachel, tell us about your paper. It's called Becoming Pro-Mysterion, Embracing a Future of Mercy for All in Romans 1:1.
Yes, and my paper, well, I'll start also with personal connection. I grew up in a multi-faith home. My mother is Catholic, my stepfather is Jewish, and they married when I was 9. So I began to, without really being aware of it, just grew up in an environment where I could learn to appreciate and later love a religion that wasn't my own. I'm Catholic, and there's a mix in my family of Catholics and Jews, and so I've asked some very important questions as a theology student about what that really means for us as a family, and how do we have discussions spiritually and about the Bible, and so my paper is there's several themes to it. One is mercy, another is Christian anti-Semitism, and being pro-mysterion, which is mysterion is the Greek word for mystery. So being leaning into that mystery, and and that will make sense when I explain a bit more about the paper. But the paper's it's an exegesis of Romans chapter 11, where St. Paul uses the allegory of the olive tree to describe how the Gentile Christians of his time, to address some of their spiritual pride in regards to the Jews of their time and of their milieu. And he writes, do not boast about the branches, he says. The Jews may have been obstinate and contrary people, and it may seem that the Jewish branch has been broken off of the family tree of God. But God has a plan, a redemptive plan to restore that branch to God's family tree. And so Paul is telling Gentile Christians of his time to check themselves, basically, and that anti-Semitic. This is one of the basically the paper does go over supersessionism, which is the belief that Christianity has replaced Judaism, or as one of the definitions I like, it belongs to Susanna Ticciati, and she says it's the belief that the church has replaced Israel in the purposes of God, and that belief will lead to some damaging implications and manifestations, and one being anti-Semitism, and of course there are many sources and reasons for anti-Semitism, and supersession is one of many. And so I wanted to address that, and I wanted to be able to write something to discuss with my family and talk about God's family tree, and being pro-mystery is we're not sure how God is going to regraft Israel into the family tree or other nations, but Paul says that he will. And so we're not sure how, but we will lean into the mystery, and we will have faith and trust that he will do just that.
Thank you, Rachel. And I love that your personal experience really brought up questions, and questions are so generative and creative if we follow them. Thank you for sharing your paper with us. Well, I'm delighted to welcome our new arrival, Tim Hartman. Tim, how did class go?
Class was good today.
All right, good.
It looked just like this. Zoom class.
You look like a professor, Tim.
Thank you. Right here from my living room. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Well, everybody, this is Tim Hartman. Tim, you were awarded a Goodwin Prize in 2011 as a doctoral student here at the University of Virginia. You were in the Theology, Ethics, and Culture program. And at the time, I found an old interview with you in which we asked you about your paper. And you said this: "I'm fascinated by what happens when culture and theology intersect. My hope upon completing my PhD will be to teach in a college or university, bringing Christian thought into dialogue with contemporary cultures, present-day problems, and its global and historical context." And here you are, assistant professor of theology at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur. And this must be a great encouragement, as I said to Jimmy, Rachel, and Abe, and other grad students joining us, that you did in fact get your PhD and get your job. We're very proud, and you have tenure. And looking back at your paper, which was amazing, is called "Lost in Translation: Post-Colonial Reflections on Guilt in the Amazon." Tim, can you tell us what role the experience of writing the essay and of winning a Goodwin Prize, what role this played in your path to Columbia Seminary and into the classroom?
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, it has. I mean, it's been an honor to be involved with Theological Horizons in this way for these years now. I mean, 2011 is a long time ago. I was talking to my now 13-year-old daughter, who's like, "What did you win?" It's like, it was 2011. You were 4. You weren't really care about Dad winning writing prizes. But it's definitely one of the things about this prize is it continues to stand out on my CV. That this, like, okay, first place in this writing prize. And the fact that this prize is a substantial amount of money has made it continue to matter and get people's attention. There can be lots of writing prizes in the world that give you a pat in the back. I mean, I've won other prizes where, like, congratulations, you're on our website, and you're like, like, if no one's heard of this organization, it doesn't really matter. Or if it's like a $50 prize. But when you get to thousands of dollars, other academics are like, wait a minute, you got what? So it's really, it gives some weight to this. And then that essay turned into be my first published essay. So when I went onto the job market, I had this published essay and the first place in the writing prize that I think set my my CV and application apart from other applicants. And to add to that, then, just the increased confidence it gave me to say, like, okay, somebody else thinks I can write. In the midst of all the hours that we spend as grad students trying to write or hoping to write or wanting to throw out what we've written, that someone's like, okay, there's something of value here. Maybe I should kind of keep going in this direction. And then finally, I've been able to use this essay in teaching students about research methods. And I'm able to say, like, you can start with a question and you can pursue that question, and you can find this question in one book that you're reading and then go do some primary research. And look, you can then even win a writing prize as a result. Maybe you want to submit to this contest. So many different ways. It's been a real gift to me.
Thanks, Tim. Tim, as a professor, where does excellent theological writing fit into the skill set that's needed for success in the academy today and in doing ministry? And I realize those are two different things, but you're in a seminary, so you can kind of see both sides.
I do want to answer both sides of these separately in many ways. I mean, excellent theological writing, it's essential in so much of higher education. I think of that in part for us as on this side of the desk, so much of who we are and how we're evaluated is based on paper. You apply for a job and people don't want to talk to you yet. They want to see what you've written, and they'll decide whether to interview you based upon CV, cover letter, maybe publications, but it doesn't, you could be as charming as in the most charming person in the world, but if you can't write, nothing's going to happen. That's not going to get off the ground. So it's an essential skill for academics. And I also find myself teaching this skill a lot. I teach theology, but I spend a lot of time teaching writing. A lot of time asking students what that pronoun's referring to. Trying to say, no, you can't say this is, what's the this, right? Be specific, name it. There's definitely moments where I'm like, am I rewarding this paper just because it's clear? Right? Because clarity is really, it's a real need and a real value. And so my students are aware that I really value writing. And so sometimes as they're preparing for ministry, they do wonder and ask me do I really need to know how to write well if I'm going to go be in ministry in a certain way? So they actually ask me this question all the time. But what I tell them is that I believe there's a real connection between clear thinking and clear writing, and that the process of having students try to put their thoughts on paper really helps them to try to think more clearly and to get to the bottom of what they're thinking. And I think clear thinking and critical thinking is a desperately needed skill. It's been needed forever, and certainly needed here in 2021. So I find theological writing to be essential.
So great. Well, it's been such a joy for us to know you, Tim, and Sarah Nell, and all your children, and to see your path all along the way. So we're very proud of you.
Thank you.
Just because. So thank you for coming after class and joining this conversation. And I did see on the guest list yesterday that Dennis Feltwell was joining us today. He's another Goodwin Prize winner. So I'm going to ask Dennis to say a few words. He won the 2009 Goodwin Prize. So we're going further back in time. And Dennis, your essay is called Go Home and Proclaim, Rediscovering Mark 5, 1 through 20 in Light of a Theology of Ministry. Sort of pursuing this conversation that we've just had with Tim about writing in the church. So you did earn your PhD in systematic theology from Duquesne. Now you are the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at Pasco Hernando State College, an adjunct lecturer in theology and religious studies, and you are a catechist at St. Mark the Evangelist Church in Tampa, Florida. So Dennis, I'm interested to ask you this question. How do the practices of writing serve your academic work and your ministry, if in fact your writing does serve those roles? And what kinds of theological writing really lands for people in the pew, for sort of your everyday church folks?
Yes, well, first, thank you for having me and inviting me to be a part of this. It's a great joy seeing the new Goodwin Prize winners. And I remember when the prize came at a really key moment in my studies. Some of you who've gone through a doctoral program know there are certain places in that program where you just wonder if you're really going to make it through at some point, just because of the time that is involved. I went into the program in 2005 thinking I would be done and have PhD in hand by 2009. No, I wasn't even finished my comprehensive exams in 2009, thanks to a series of unfortunate events, as one story puts it. So anyway, thank you for having me here. For me, the writing is always informed by the things that I'm reading at a particular time, or the events in the world at a particular time. So it's in many ways the idea doesn't always come to me immediately. In my case, this is the story of Legion, the demon, and Jesus driving him out, which is what did that. It was very odd. I was a student I'm sorry, I was a teacher at a grade school, of all things. I was finishing up my second year of grade school teaching. I was teaching math at the time, had no idea. I was a pre-med, so I had no idea I was going to be a teacher either. I was dragged kicking and screaming from the pre-med path. And at the very last day of school, we had our prayer service, and the prayer service, this was the gospel reading. And I was left scratching my head thinking, what dummy chose this reading to send us off into the summer, something like that. So I really struggled with it. And then it hit me all of a sudden, wait, it has something to do with ministry. Jesus is constantly asking people to come along with him in his ministry. They're constantly giving him excuses of why they don't. Here's a guy who's begging him to go, and Jesus says no. Instead, he's got to go somewhere else. And so that's where I came up with the title, Go Home and Proclaim. It's the what Jesus tells him. No, you don't come with me. Go home and go back and tell your family and your kin all that's been done. And so that's how it got started. My reading, my writing has not been as plentiful as I would have imagined 11 years ago, 12 years ago. Just because of the path that I took. I always thought that I was going to wind up at, if not a Catholic college or university, at least one with a Christian mission and identity. And I've now in my 11th year of full-time employment in higher education. Never once have I been employed by such a school. So it's been very interesting. However, I do have outlets for it, and it's always a strange outlet. Like, for example, even in my adjunct instruction at various Catholic institutions, I don't actually teach in the theology and religious studies department. I teach in the nursing programs. I teach healthcare ethics. I teach a course on Benedictine spirituality as a capstone at one of the Benedictine colleges, and things like that. So it's always found interesting ways of. I'm very rarely speaking with other theologians, so this is always a welcome opportunity to do so. Many times I'm speaking with people who not only are not actively engaged in faith, sometimes they're in many ways resistant to it in so many ways. So that's been where I've been writing. The most recent example I have was last year as the pandemic hit. I had my first experience of Zoom. And even now, as I look at all of your faces, they're all frozen. So I hope that, I hope you can still see me and hear me clearly. Karen, I can see you nodding, so there you go. But just about every face is frozen right now. So I attended my first Mass on Zoom. And they had all kinds of technical difficulties, and then all of a sudden somebody put a filter on the Facebook Live feed, and there were weird crowns and hearts and little congratulatory confetti coming down in the middle of Mass. And I was thinking, wow, this is really celebratory, but I don't think this is what it's about. So, and then finally the feed was cut off; it was interrupted, and so that gave rise to the title of my article, Mass Interrupted, which appeared last year in the Homiletic and Pastoral Review. And it was really just a thought on what are we doing here? Why are we here at this event? And so that's kind of where the writing has gone for me. I've tried to write in such a way that it's always inviting people into the pews. When I was working actively in faith formation toward the end of my doctoral work, I was more active involved in ministry there. I had a little column in the church bulletin called Learning Faith, Living Faith. It was always a reflection on the gospel, and it always ended with something, no matter how tortured the invitation was, it was always connected in some way to the gospel reading for that week. But it was always an invitation, get involved, come into the church. Here are the opportunities coming up this week, whatever that was. And so the writing always has to have with it the invitation.
Thank you, Dennis, for sharing your experience. And it's so gratifying to see, the sort of all the different paths that theological study can generate, and to see you doing your good work with so many different people in so many areas of life. So thanks for joining us and sharing your experience of writing. Well, we're gonna have some time for open questions, but before we turn and kind of open the floor, I'd like to ask Rachael and Jimmy and Abraham and Tim this question. Each of you is currently engaged in theological study as a student or as a professor. What purpose or vision or hope is getting you up in the morning? Rachael, would you lead us off?
Sure. And actually, I wrote this before our meeting, and I have to say that because it repeats pretty much what Tim was saying about writing.
Great.
And the whole, we're not sure what your pronoun refers to. I think that's my life right now, talking to some undergraduate students, and I am thrilled to write something of quality. I've been writing since I was young, and I was an English major as an undergrad. So I think whatever theology courses I will ever have the privilege to teach in the future, teaching students how to write it's just not only what I think is a fundamental component, but it's one of my passions. Is please let's learn how to communicate this well, because then you'll do more justice to your topic, and the reader will be grateful. And yeah, so I think that, of course, it's especially important in theology, in talking about some, at times, very sensitive subjects, and what you want to be very precise and clear, and sensitive to your audience.
Thank you. Well, Jimmy, if you've got two kids, we know who's getting you up in the morning, but tell us about what vision or purpose or hope is getting you up in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So the work of theology is just immensely joyful for me. I mentioned earlier that reading and writing about texts and events and activities and the truth and thinking about them with others it brings me such great joy. So even if I weren't in a doctoral program, I would be engaging and reading scripture and theologians and history. It's just what I like to do, so it's a really wonderful fit in that respect. But I think, for me, it's really important to keep the goods that are internal to the practice of theology or scriptural study constantly in view, and the nice thing in some ways about theology is that you're not entering into a vocation that has very tempting external goods, in the sense that there isn't a job with a huge salary on the other side, and it doesn't bring a whole lot of cultural capital or status today. Maybe it used to, but that's actually can be a good thing, because it allows you to pursue the goods that are internal to the practice. And I think that, for theologians, the goods are primarily the pursuit of truth. Who is a person, and so coming to know the truth is not just an intellectual exercise, but is actually it is a holistic process, of coming to know Jesus and the Lord and others who are united to him, and extending that relationship through your speech and your action outward toward others. So it's a holistic activity that provides great joy and community and hopefulness. That's what gets me out in the morning.
Thank you. I love seeing intellectuals and scholars speak, because it's so clearly who you are. And I'm married to one, so really there's nothing else he could do. He's just born for this. And I think you are too. I see that in all of you. Abraham, tell us what hope or vision is getting you up in the morning there in Vancouver.
So recently at Regent College, we've been able to go back into the building, and if you ever have a chance to come to Vancouver, it's a wonderful place. But in kind of our main atrium area, there's a big wall, and it just has kind of Regent's vision. I can't remember it word for word, but basically what it is that Regent College seeks to cultivate students who are committed, joyful, rigorous followers of Jesus for his church and for the world. I think there's something really hopeful about that message. I love it in the sense of the hope that it seeks to move towards, cultivating people who are academic, who are rigorous, who seek to do good work, excellent work, but also people who seek to be joyful, who want to be committed to Christ and to the world. I've been inspired. That I think is something that inspires me. I don't teach in a college, but I've had the opportunity to teach at a church, and teaching through kind of the New Testament and an Old Testament overview at a church, and that's just been a delight for me to help folks encounter God and to dive into the story of God, to the story of Israel and for the church, and to be able to pass on what I've received. That's been a delight. But I think something else that I've been thinking about and that's been giving me a lot of hope is for some of my fun reading. I've been trying to read through a little bit of Erdman's new series, Theological Education Between the Times. Great series, really recommended. Books are all like 150 pages long, so it's pretty easy. But I think it's just been a really compelling series in the sense that the first book that I finished is Willie James Jennings' After Whiteness. And I think his book really gives a good vision of what theological education in the future will look like. Not something that is going to be endlessly conforming into one particular image of an academic, and not something that's going to result in endless critique, endless tearing down of structures, endless shaking of the foundations, but actually a vision of theological education that results in belonging, in communion, that honors the diversity of the gifts that the members bring, that sees in some ways the academy as a place and a site of joining, not critique, not just conformity, but joining, communion, where all people can bring their diversities, their stories, their experiences. And that, of course, we see that most clearly, hopefully, in the church, that place where the members join together and God is glorified.
That's so beautiful. Abraham, would you put the name of that series in the chat so we can take that with us? Thank you so much. Love that vision and hope for the future. And Tim, so you've got tenure. You could just sit and enjoy, but I know that's not you. So tell us a little bit more about how you're looking ahead and what you're hoping for and envisioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just taught that book that Abraham was talking about to my anti-racist theologies class for Doctor of Ministry students. So I can underline Abraham's recommendation there. What gets me out of bed is thinking about ways to help my students to better communicate the hope of Jesus Christ to the world. With a nod to Charles Marsh, I'm deeply invested in the social consequences of religious belief, the work of lived theology. And so I think that it's important to help students and people really reflect on what they believe and how it affects the world around us. So, whether this is why we read theology over the history of the church, and to see what people have been saying, and so we can know what we need to say and what needs to be said and how we need to act. So that's the beauty of teaching. The students keep changing every semester. And so what worked once, worked before, may or may not work again. You hope to have enough tricks up your sleeve to get through those, but they keep learning, and I keep learning from them. So that's what gets me up and going.
Thanks, Tim. And I want to take a shout out to the process of this writing prize too. When you all submit your papers, we take the names off of the papers and we take the school affiliations, and we have 3 judges who read them, kind of blind readings. But all the same, my memory is that Tim, because he was here at UVA, actually submitted his paper like under a false name because he didn't want to be like, didn't want there to be bias. But anyway, so when he was like revealed that he had won, everybody's like, Tim Hartman, like, that's not fair. Like, I promise he won fair and square. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Tim. Well, we have about 5 minutes for questions. And so I'm just inviting you, if you'd like to just unmute yourself. We're a small enough group that we don't have to worry too much about interrupting each other. If you have a question for each other, if you have a direct question to one person, would just invite you to ask questions or make whatever comment you want to make at this point.
Hey, I'll ask a question. My name is Brian. I am a postdoc in New Testament at Baylor University. I did not win this prize or submit to it because I didn't know that it existed. I did go to Duke Divinity, so Jimmy, tell Durham, give Durham my love. I miss it out there in North Carolina. Here's my question. So I am overseeing some master's students here at Baylor who will be submitting for this year's prize. So my question to all of you is, what advice would you offer to them as they get ready to submit their essays?
So Karen, can I answer? Like,
Yes,
I want to answer.
I have no advice. I'm just
not only did I have the honor of winning this prize, I got to judge it one time.
That's right.
I mean, my advice to those master's students would be the advice to respond to most call for papers. Read the directions and follow them, like, as carefully as possible, right? So part of what, I don't have it right in front of me, Karen might, but like the connection here between theology broadly construed and people, the world, that connection really matters for this prize. You get some really excellent papers that are just kind of in the clouds, and they end up moving along in the process, but typically not winning, because at the end of the day, Theological Horizons is about the intersection of academia and the world. So it's that moment of intersection that I would push them towards.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Other advice or thoughts? We've been asked if we have sort of guiding questions or themes, and we really don't. And I would say that our thinking there has been that, graduate students, you're working in all kinds of areas and all kinds of scholarships. So for us, the criteria are, creative theological thinking, excellence in scholarship, engagement with the Christian tradition, and commitment to the well-being of the church. And I know that judges kind of give weight, so some are more creative and some are more church oriented. So it's not like everything has to be there, but those are just kind of what we're looking for. And we're wanting to surface you wonderful scholars, the ones that you've met today. So I would say, Brian, that, for students who are writing a paper for a class, they're already writing it. That's the kind of paper that I think is likely submitted. It's something that just stands out as something they want to develop. Any other thoughts for him?
Just to add on to what you said, Karen, when I did end up submitting the paper, I had to revise it, not significantly, but I did have to revise it somewhat in order to conform to those criteria that you mentioned. In particular, the one about engagement with the tradition. I had to do a little bit more reading and also frame the question in such a way that it included voices from the whole, range of the tradition with respect to my particular question. So yeah, I really tried to look at those criteria and think about how to meet all of them in one paper, which is hard to do. Actually, it's difficult, but it's good.
Yeah, thank you for that insight into your experience. Well, our time is coming to a close, and I know we could have much more to say, and I'm so glad each of you have come. We've recorded this. I invite you to go back to the website, theologicalhorizons.org/Goodwin prizes. You'll see interviews with all of the winners going back to, I think, 2001. They don't all have interviews, but titles, abstracts of their paper. I think if there's a paper that you're particularly interested in seeing, if you'll contact me, I'll ask the authors if they could share it. We did that with Carolyn and Abe and Nellie. So yeah, anything that you'd like to pursue further, we'd love to hear from you. Love to see you submit a paper or share with students and friends. And again, I want to thank Frank and Carrie Louthan. I hope that your hearts are full. I know mine is, with gratitude to hear from these real live scholars. It gives me great hope for the Academy and for the church and for the world to hear from each of you, and to know that that you are pursuing the goods that are in the pursuit of theology, which is a beautiful discipline and a hopeful way of expressing God's work in the world. So thanks all for being here today, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Let me know how we can serve you and how we might improve this program. So go in peace. Thanks to all. Bye.